Okay, so welcome. I am 100% aware that this video is being made a little later than I said I would make the video. I made a video yesterday and it sucked. So I decided I would try to make a video this morning, and then that one sucked. And so now I'm finding myself making a video at night. It's about midnight my time, which means it's 11 your time. My apologies for making it so late. It'll probably be around close to midnight by the time this thing is finished processing and has been posted to YouTube. So yeah, anyways, enough about me bitching about why my videos suck or something like that. When we're going to finish the chat about the real business cycle model, we're going to be talking about monetary policy and inflation in the RBC model. Now, we've already covered a lot of stuff with this, so this is going to kind of wrap up some things. It's going to sand off some rough edges, so to speak. So if you remember in this model, real money holdings increased utility, right? The utility function was increasing in money holdings. So if people held more real money balances, their utility went up. So here's a question for you. If that's the case, right, if holding real money balances increases utility, surely everybody would be happier if the central bank printed more money, right? I mean, they're making more money, right? They're printing out more money. Therefore, theoretically, your utility should go up, right? Well, according to this model, wrong. Because in this model, when we have perfectly flexible prices, right, we have prices that respond immediately to shocks, and we also have perfect competition, well, we end up with monetary neutrality. Therefore, if the central bank prints more money, it leads to inflation. If you want to think about this in terms of the quantity theory of money, right, hold the velocity constant and hold the rate of change of output constant. What happens? Well, any change in the money supply leads to a change in inflation. That's what happens in this model, right? So delta M equals delta V. Now, printing more money makes more inflation. Therefore, when the utility's got real money balances in it, not nominal, and higher inflation stems from increases in nominal money balances, well, it's not really doing much for you, and it's likely to hurt the agent, right? It's likely to reduce your utility. And thus, it generates a welfare loss for society, which is not good. So we have to ask ourselves, is there an optimal inflation rate that maximizes welfare for the economy? Now, you might think maybe this sounds a little familiar. Like, have we heard something like this before? And if you're thinking that, well, you're actually 100% totally correct. You have heard this before. And it's actually what we talked about at the beginning of this semester with Milton Friedman's optimal quantity of money. This model, or in this model, I should say, social welfare is maximized when the nominal interest rate is set equal to 0. And if I keep pausing here and there, it's because I have a cat that's all about sitting on Dad's lap and crawling all over Dad and all that stuff. So I got him sitting on my shoulder now like he's a little grenade launcher. Grenade launcher Odo. He's cute, though. I love you, buddy. It's a shame you can't see him. I turned my camera on, but for some reason this thing won't let me turn on the camera while I'm already recording, so whatever. Anyways, Milton Friedman argued that we need to set the nominal interest rate to 0 because, well, for one, if Milton Friedman was a guitarist, it would be this guy right here, John Petrucci. Guitarist of Dream Theater, everybody. If you haven't heard of Dream Theater, check out Dream Theater. They're absolutely freaking amazing. Anyways, if we recall what Milton Friedman said, the private opportunity cost of holding money depended on the nominal interest rate. And the logic was, if the nominal interest rate was the marginal social cost of printing an additional unit of currency. If we've got fiat currency, the marginal social cost of printing money is pretty low. In fact, it's so low, you can pretty much just approximate it to 0. Now, when you do that, right, where it's pretty much 0, what you get is an equilibrium in the money market where the private opportunity cost of holding money is also 0. Right? So it's a marginal cost equals marginal benefit, right? Marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Setting the nominal interest rate to 0 gives us, implying via the Fisher equation, when the nominal interest rate is 0, any inefficiencies generated by deviations of the marginal social cost of printing money and the private opportunity cost of holding that printed money goes to 0, right? There's no deviation, there's no divergence of marginal cost anymore. Therefore, we end up with a case where the real interest rate equals the rate of deflation. This is kind of like a cutoff point where one is indifferent between holding bonds and holding money. Because if you're holding bonds that increase that has a real rate of return of, say, 3%, right? But the rate of deflation is also 3%. You can hold bonds and get a real rate of return of 3%, or you can hold money, which deflates at a rate of 3%, meaning your money is gaining value at a rate of 3%. So you can hold bonds, you can hold money. You're indifferent between them, right? Whichever one you choose to hold, whichever one you would prefer to hold, you'll be made better off. Either way, right? You can't be made better off by going one way versus the other. So, with money in the utility function, utility directly depends on real money balances. We can sort of think of this as the monetary authority choosing its policy instrument, steady state inflation, to maximize the agent's utility to try to achieve a steady state value of the real money balances. Now, steady state consumption, this little CSS, right? Steady state consumption is independent of steady state inflation. I didn't work out the math on this. If you want to see me work out the math, basically, if you want to see what steady state consumption is and how it's independent of steady state inflation, I'd be happy to do so. I'm not going to be making a video of me doing that because it's going to take a while. But the first order condition for the optimal inflation rate is achieved when the nominal interest rate is set equal to 0, right? So when we took our derivatives and we set them equal to 0 to get those like first order conditions, which then become equilibrium conditions, when it comes to money with the inflation rate and all that stuff, well, things are best when the nominal rate is equal to 0. This rule is attributed to Milton Friedman because the guy was awesome. Unfortunately, not everybody liked this idea. Some people thought this idea was complete crap. They were wrong, but they thought it was crap. Well, actually, they weren't wrong. They're just considering other avenues, other situations where Friedman's rule may not hold all that well. Phelps in 1973 argued that money growth could actually generate revenue for the government. This is what's known as the inflation tax. So you're probably going like, hey, Jeremy, how's inflation a tax, right? Because taxes are like that shit that I have to pay when I get my paycheck and, I'm supposed to get like, $1,000 in my paycheck, but instead I only get like $750 or something like that. And I'd be like, yeah, it sucks. It really sucks because it happens to me too. But that's not the only kind of tax. Because what a tax does, right, is a tax takes resources in one sector of an economy and it moves it to another. It's transferring. It's a transfer of resources, right? In a static sense, if the government takes something from somebody and then gives it to somebody else, right, that is a tax. But that's not the only kind of tax that a society can face. Inflation is also a tax because it is transferring wealth. It's a hidden tax, right? Because the tax that you pay, like your income tax, your sales tax, your capital gains tax, your like estate taxes, property taxes, ad valorem taxes, taxes. Taxes are great, aren't they? Oh my God, everyone loves taxes. Well, inflation's also a tax. So you're being taxed in ways you didn't even realize you were being taxed. Isn't that wonderful? Because it's transferring wealth, but it's doing it over time. It's not doing it in like a static, one time period framework. It's doing it over a dynamic, like, horizon, right? Now, taxes by the government here are lump sum in the model, meaning they're non-distortionary. If you were to think of it like, y equals mx plus b, and you want to know what the slope is, right? Well, the slope is m, but you're taking the derivative of that in order to get m, meaning that b differentiates to 0. That's what taxes do in this model. They're lump sum. So it's not like, okay, well, you're earning this much, so you pay this % on your taxes. That's distortionary. This is literally everybody pays, say, $100. You pay a flat lump sum tax. Everybody pays $100. Doesn't matter what you make. You pay $100 in taxes, and that's all you pay. That's non-distortionary. But the inflation stuff, on the other hand, is a little different. Because let's say you borrow $10,000. And you pay $10,000 back after 1 year at an interest rate of 5%. Right? Nominal interest rate of 5%. Now let's say the current rate of inflation is 2%. Well, that means the real rate of return on that is 3%. Right? What's 3% of $1,000? $30. Right? So this person that lent $1,000 to you gets $1,000 back, but he also gets $30 in interest on top of that. But what happens if, say, as soon as you take out that loan, what happens if the inflation rate goes from 2% to 3%? Well, now that person is only getting $20 in interest back. Okay, let's say the inflation rate goes up to 5%. Well, that guy gets nothing back. All right, he gets back exactly what he lent out. It's not very good. So now let's make things a little bit worse. What happens if inflation is 6%? How much does he get back? Well, he loses 1% of that $1,000. Right? What is that? Well, he just lost $10. So, technically speaking, you came out ahead because the real rate of return was negative. And when the real rate of return is negative, what happens is it ends up helping borrowers because they don't have to pay back as much, but it hurts lenders. And as that inflation rate goes up and up and up and up and up, well, basically the value of the debt that you have to pay, the nominal value stays the same, but the real value is changing. The real value is going down. So what was $1,000 that you had to pay back today, a year from now, that $1,000 is no longer worth $1,000. So you end up having to pay back less if inflation's very, very high. It's transferring resources. It's transferring resources away from the person that lent that money to you over to you. Because you don't have to pay back as much as what you initially had to pay back. It's a tax. It's transferring that wealth. Now, with these lump sum taxes I was talking about, they're obviously not true in real life. I don't think there's a single society out there that's like, you know what, just pay $1,000 or the equivalent of 1,000 units of whatever their currency is. I don't think that happens. In fact, I can say with almost 100% certainty that doesn't happen. Therefore, according to Phelps, if we have some kind of distortionary tax, like a non-lump sum tax, whether it's like, marginal income tax, something like that, when we reduce the nominal interest rate to zero, meaning that we have a rate of deflation equal to the real interest rate, the government has to increase their tax revenue through higher actual taxes, right? Because the government doesn't produce anything. And I'm not saying that in like a, crazy libertarian Peter Schiff, government doesn't produce anything. Government sucks. I'm not saying that. I'm saying legit, the government doesn't produce anything. If you look at the aggregate production function for an economy, right? Y equals F of K and L. Now, K is not government, K is capital. L is not government, L is labor. Government doesn't produce. Therefore, the government isn't generating revenue via the market. What are they doing? They're taxing, right? They're transferring resources. If you want to participate in our society, that's great. You got to pay a fee. Those are your taxes. So if the nominal interest rate's zero and we've got a rate of deflation equal to the real interest rate, it basically removes avenues via which the government can generate tax revenue. Therefore, they have to tax higher taxes in order to generate revenue sufficient for government spending, which can generate inefficiencies by having to rely solely on direct taxation. Therefore, it might be optimal to have a little bit of inflation. So how does inflation generate revenue? Well, we saw this in the last lecture, so I'll kind of fly through it really quickly. But, in case it was a little confusing, if it was like a little math, whatever, a second look at it never hurt anybody. So it's generated via something called seigniorage. All right, and we had the central bank's government constraint, the central bank's budget constraint. Every single video I've cut, for some stupid reason, I always say the central bank's government constraint. I'm like, that doesn't even make sense. Why the hell would I say that? Anyways, the central bank's budget constraint. There we go. Sound it out, Jeremy. We have S equals the flow of money creation, basically. Right? 1 plus pi times MT plus 1 minus MT. So that is new money being generated. And then we're subtracting out receipts from the central bank, which are basically profits that the central bank earns via their open market operations. Right? The 1 plus pi MT plus 1 minus MT, that is seigniorage, right? It's the creation of money to generate revenue for the government. RCB, or receipts from the central bank, right? Now, the central bank gives the receipts from the central bank over to the fiscal authority. So here's the fiscal authority's budget constraint. GT, right? So Y equals C plus I plus G, right? This is what G is equal to. G is a function of tax revenue, borrowing, right? Because you got that 1 plus R to the negative 1 times BT plus 1. That is new bonds that they're selling, minus BT, bonds they got to pay back, plus seigniorage, plus receipts from the central bank. So because the central bank's budget constraint, I have to say it slowly now, is technically included in the government's budget constraint, well, what we do is we combine the two. I literally just plug ST in there, and I get this. Now, because I've got minus RCBT plus RCBT, those two guys just cancel out. Those suckers are gone. So from that, the receipts cancel out, and it gives me this. Now, instead of having two sources of creation of revenue for the government, we now have three. We've got taxation, we have borrowing, and then we've got money printing. So by having that extra tool at the government's disposal to generate revenue, they can reduce the burden of taxes on the economy. They can also reduce the burden of having to pay back their debt, right? Via what I talked about. If you inflate a little bit, not too much, but just a little bit, right? You monetize the debt and you don't have to pay as much back as what you actually took out. So the central bank can print more money and it helps the government finance stuff. But yeah, it does more than that because it, as I said, it reduces the value of the debt the government owes. Right? If the debt is just the flow of bonds, right? So this DT equals the flow of these bonds, right? And if we look at the Fisher equation in a slightly different way, we get this. Well, if inflation were to go up, holding the nominal interest rate constant, then the real interest rate has to fall. So in nominal terms, the value of the debt the government has to pay back falls. And it's called monetizing the debt. So in theory, if the government had a hard time paying their debts back, they could just inflate their debt away. I mean, look at what Germany did, right? The Weimar Republic after World War I. Look what happened with them, right? They printed a bunch of money. They paid all their debts back, right? No problem, right? Look at Venezuela right now. Crazy in debt. What are they doing? They're paying their debt back by just printing money, right? No problem. It's totally fine, guys. Nothing to worry about here. Just keep on moving. Nothing to see here. Nothing to look at here. Oh, wait, it only works in small doses. If we end up overusing it, well, we have a situation like this. This guy's probably going to buy a loaf of bread with all that money, right? This is what have hyperinflation. And hyperinflation's a bad thing. It's a very bad thing. There's been a lot of talk recently, actually, that the U.S. might be experiencing hyperinflation. I personally am a little skeptical that we will. I don't think it's quite going to be that bad. Do I think we will see an increase in inflation soon? Yes. Do I think it will go above the Fed's target range? Yes. However, I don't think we're going to end up with hyperinflation. But that's just me. Now, we talked about this a little bit, but I think this is where we left off with some of this stuff on the monetary stuff in the last lecture. There's two theories of the price level currently. Well, ever, really. there's monetary policy dominance, right? So it's like the monetary theory of the price level. And what we're assuming here is basically that when you have this massive system of equations like what we saw with the real business cycle model, right, there can be a set of equations that describe monetary policy behavior that close out the system, or there can be a set of equations that describe fiscal policy behavior that close out the system. In the case of dominance of monetary policy, right, it's the set of equations that describe monetary policy that close the equation out, or the system of equations out. And what happens is that fiscal policy in this case would be assumed to adjust to ensure that the government's intertemporal budget constraint is always in balance, right? Because the government's intertemporal budget constraint is always going to be satisfied. Whether it's by taxing or by borrowing, it's always going to be balanced. Now, what happens here is that basically the fiscal authority has to make sure that their intertemporal budget balance is like satisfied, right? It's maintained. And monetary policy doesn't have to do anything about that. So in this case, monetary policy, right, the monetary authority, they're free to set the nominal money stock or the nominal rate of interest, whatever their policy tool is. They're free to set that however they please. And the fiscal authority just kind of basically has to do what they do and not rely on the central bank to take care of them, right? So fiscal policy is passive in this case, and monetary policy is active. This is the way things work in the United States, right? The fiscal authority in the United States is Congress. They have the power of the purse. The monetary authority is the Federal Reserve. Now, Congress can pass whatever spending bills they want, right? Nothing's stopping them from that. If they don't have the tax revenue coming in order to be able to spend whatever they want to spend, they have to sell bonds. But when they sell those bonds currently, because the Federal Reserve is independent of Congress, the Federal Reserve is under no requirement whatsoever to buy those bonds from the public. And they certainly don't buy them from the Treasury. So anybody that tries to say, the government's just spending money and the Fed's printing money to fund that, they're missing a few crucial steps there. If you ever hear somebody say that, just be like, no, you're missing some steps here, buddy. Or friend or person or whatever. They're missing some steps. Namely, that the government is selling those bonds to the public. And then from the public, the Federal Reserve, should they want to buy those bonds, then buys those bonds. And they convert those bonds into liquidity. And that would be how that process that they're talking about is actually carried out. But the Federal Reserve isn't just going, okay, masters. They're not like slaves to Congress or anything like that. They can do as they please, for the most part, as long as they're meeting their dual mandate. Therefore, the central bank is independent, right? I'm sure you've probably heard of people going on about auditing the Fed. Maybe at one point you've thought auditing the Fed is a good idea. I sure as hell did. And then I kind of learned what audit the Fed meant, and I also kind of learned that the Fed's already being audited by an independent agency. And on top of that, audit the Fed means basically give Congress power over the Federal Reserve. We're going to talk in a little bit about how that's a bad idea. Now, there's fiscal policy dominance, right? Or the fiscal theory of the price level. Because under the monetary theory of the price level, what happens is the central bank manages the price level and the fiscal authority balances the budget. Under the fiscal theory of the price level, what happens is the opposite of that. You flip the roles. So now under fiscal policy dominance or the fiscal theory of the price level, what happens is the fiscal authority now sets the price level and the monetary authority balances the budget. It's a very, very bad idea because there are all sorts of perverse incentives here. So how does this work? Well, now the fiscal authority sets its expenditures and taxes without any regard to the requirement of their intertemporal budget balance via taxation or borrowing. Because if the value of these taxes or bonds isn't sufficient to finance expenditures, well, seigniorage adjusts to ensure the government's intertemporal budget constraint is still satisfied. Meaning, basically, the monetary authority, in our case the Federal Reserve, would basically just be the lapdogs of Congress. And they would just go, okay, Congress, you want to spend another $2 trillion, but you only have a few $100 million? Well, we'll just print the rest and give it to you. Doesn't end well. Now that we've covered those two theories, let's talk about something that's known as modern monetary theory. My. This is a horribly misunderstood theory by both the right and the left. Because, well, very progressive economists, there actually aren't very many of them. Most economists agree that MMT is kind of a garbage idea. But progressives tend to think modern monetary theory is a wonderful idea. They don't quite understand just how bad of an idea it really is. Now, on the right generally don't understand modern monetary theory because, well, they don't really understand how it works, and they also sometimes think that the U.S. is currently operating under modern monetary theory when it's not. And if you ever need any kind of a push to like see who thinks that this is the way that we're operating right now, there is a commentator on Fox News. His name is Tucker Carlson. And I kid you not, I was watching Tucker earlier tonight as soon as I got done doing work, like for my job. And I'm watching Tucker, and he's going on and on about the way that the government is currently spending, and they're proposing like this new $2 trillion stimulus package, and the Fed's just going to print the money to pay for it, and that's modern monetary theory. And I'm like, yeah, you're missing steps, and no, we are not operating under modern monetary theory right now. So anyways, I'll clear my throat on this one. There are certain members of Congress, I will not mention them by name, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie Sanders, oops, I guess I mentioned them by name, who advocate insanely high spending proposals, right? And some of these spending proposals that they advocate aren't bad ideas, right? There are some things that, well, if a market doesn't really exist for it, but there's like a demand for it, well, that's where the government comes in and provides like the public good, right? Like national parks, for example. Roads, things like that. National defense, the police, fire department, those kinds of things. It's public good, right? So there is government spending that is necessary. But some of these spending plans were like, okay, ensure Medicare for all. I'm not sure if that's currently in the $2 trillion infrastructure, although I'm sure if they could find a way to sneak it in there, they would. Medicare for all, like basically like a universal healthcare system. I've heard talks about like, that people want a federal job guarantee. Like you lose your job and the government's just going to give you a job. It's like, it's going to work well. Eliminating cow farts to protect the environment. I kid you not. Although, all right, I'm going to say a bad word because it's going to be funny here. I shit you not. People actually thought we need to eliminate cow farts to protect the environment. Yeah, it's actually true. But really well, wouldn't it? Yeah. These plans are wildly major restructuring. Honestly, easily shift away from fossil fuels and technology there yet. A lot of these infrastructure bills right to in for a lot of private industry out there. All these things cost money, and certain members of Congress, like always on camera. I'm sorry, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I will get it right one day. So always on camera was talking about how we need like a $10 trillion infrastructure bill because $2 trillion isn't going to cut it. We need $10 trillion. Yeah. Apparently she has an economics degree too. I don't know what that says. $10 trillion is crazy expensive, and that we can't afford that. It's just, that's outside the realm of possibility, right? So any traditional means of financing, it's not going to happen. So there's this theory of monetary policy called modern monetary theory, or MMT. Now, under MMT, the idea is if the government can issue its own currency, then it can use seigniorage to pay for its projects. Therefore, it advocates the fiscal theory of the price level. Thus, the fiscal authority takes an active role and monetary policy takes a passive role. Now, maybe you're asking, how in the hell does this work? Or maybe you're going, wow, Jeremy, you're a jackass. You're really biased and you're shooting this idea down immediately. Well, I am really biased in this case. I try not to be in general. But in this case, this is a terrible, terrible, terrible idea. So, okay, you might go, how does this work? Let's assume that that's the only question you're asking. I'm going to pretend that's the only question you're asking because I don't get feedback in real time here. And I would answer by saying that it works this way. Congress sets a spending bill, whatever amount they want. It says whatever amount they weigh. I made it, oops. Sorry. Whatever amount that they want. And the central bank has to print the money to fund the bill. And then they just give that money to Congress. And then Congress spends it as they want. Thereby, it removes any independence of the central bank. And it gives Congress no incentive to minimize costs. Because Congress can just keep spending and spending and spending. But now, you're probably going, okay, they're putting all this money into the economy. There's going to be a lot of money circulating around. How are we going to deal with the inflation problem? Because, well, when this happens, there is a serious problem of inflation. How do we fix this? Well, we fix it by just taxing it out of existence. That makes sense, doesn't it, guys? Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me. So it flips the roles of the fiscal and monetary authorities around, because originally the fiscal authority balanced the budget, monetary authority balanced the price level. Under MMT, monetary authority balances the budget, and the fiscal authority balances the price level. And yeah, so to control the inflation problem, fiscal authority just sets taxes and makes sure that they get that money out of existence. I don't see how that is going to work. What would you tax to get that money out of existence without taxing the wrong people? Because there's no one-size-fits-all policy on this, right? Anyways. And because there'd be more reserves being printed than before, the central bank still uses open market operations to buy and sell bonds to maintain reserve requirements held by central banks. So there's still a role for the monetary authority to play. However, not a very big role. So really here what's going on is we're not just giving the power of the purse to Congress, we're also giving them the power of monetary policy. And they can just dictate how much the central bank prints and how much money can circulate in the economy. They would control interest rates, meaning the central bank basically becomes the National Bank of Mom when we go to college. Because I don't know about you, but I remember when I went to college, if I got really broke, I would call the National Bank of Mom, and the National Bank of Mom would make a deposit into my account, and I'd be able to eat ramen noodles for the next couple of days. It was nice. But, okay, it's good for us when we're going to college. But the United States is a pretty advanced country. And if we're going to think about it in terms of, like, where it is relative to, like, a human growing up through life, it's definitely well past the college phase. I think we're beyond that. And it also causes a bit of a problem because, the Phillips curve is a thing. The relationship between inflation and unemployment is a thing. Whether it is predictable or there's like some kind of an expectation structure to it, which I do believe that there's kind of an expectations thing to it. If you go by the Barrow and Gordon model that you learned a few weeks ago, right? That curve does exist. Therefore, if you were in Congress, right, and you were in the House of Representatives, so you are up for re-election every 2 years, and you're just coming up for re-election, and you want to make sure you get re-elected, well, what do? Well, you need to make your constituents happy, right? The people that voted you in need to be pleased with you if you want to have any semblance of a hope of getting re-elected. Well, what's one way to do that? You can minimize unemployment in your area. And if the Phillips curve exists, how would you minimize unemployment? I don't know about you, but I would probably consider increasing the inflation rate. Because if you increase inflation, unemployment will fall. And if you increase inflation and unemployment falls, well, that works really well for you, especially right around election time. Because everyone's going to go, I have a job. And my congressperson that I elected gave me this job, basically. Right? They didn't directly give you the job, but, they voted for policy that resulted in me getting this job. Right? That's the reason why presidents that are up for re-election in the middle of a recession generally don't get re-elected. And it's not even just that bad. That party tends to lose power. Look at what happened in 2020, right? The Democrats had a majority in the House, and the Republicans had a majority in the Senate, and they also had the White House with Donald Trump. Now, there's a lot of reasons why Donald Trump did not get reelected. The fact that we were in a recession was one of them. And no, one of those reasons is not voter fraud. That's for you, YouTube. But there are a lot of reasons why Donald Trump did not get reelected. And one of them is the fact that we were in a recession. I did not expect Donald Trump to get reelected. I was unsurprised when he did not get reelected. Now, the Republicans, basically having the majority in the federal government at that point in time, lost their majority because, Joe Biden got elected. We followed that pretty closely, I'm sure. Everybody did. And then the Republicans lost the Senate, namely with John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock being elected in Georgia. So that's not an uncommon thing to have happen in the middle of a recession. On the flip side, right, if you're up for re-election, the economy's doing really, really, really well, that looks good for you. So if you're a congressperson and you want to get re-elected, how do you get re-elected? Make sure the economy's going well. How do you do that? Well, I don't know. Maybe, vote for inflationary policy to reduce unemployment in your district. That worked out really well for you. That means every 2 years we get a spike of inflation. Well, we've now introduced a political business cycle into monetary policy and just the overall business cycle. That's not a good thing. Every 2 years, right, there's going to be a spike in inflation. How long do you think it's going to take before people get used to that? Whether you assume rational expectations or you assume adaptive expectations, it's only a matter of time before the public gets used to it. Anyways, enough of that rant. Modern monetary theory has some serious proponents, namely Stephanie Kelton at SUNY Stony Brook. She worked under Bernie Sanders in his campaign in 2016, loves this idea. I've watched videos on YouTube of her talking about it. I'm currently unconvinced based on what she has said. However, she has at least attempted to make some decent arguments. There are other economists. There's a guy named Steve Keen, total jackass, that thinks modern monetary theory is a good idea. A lot of people see it as a way to try to help reduce income inequality. And, if it worked perfectly, if it worked the way people like Stephanie Kelton, Steve Keen, total jackass, Bernie Sanders, AOC, if it worked the way that they thought that it would work, yes, it would reduce income inequality. And I'm not going to say income inequality isn't a big deal. It is a big deal. It's something that we all need to be concerned about, right? The real question is, what can we do about it? But that's a different topic for an entirely different course. But a lot of people see it as a great way to help make things better for a lot of people in the country. A lot of people argue it's a foolproof way to relax the government's budget constraint in a feasible way. I'm not one of those people, in case you haven't noticed. But it falls short in a number of areas. It doesn't consider the risk of capital flight, right? What's capital flight? Well, capital flight is basically when you have an issue like excess regulation, capital controls, tax burdens, currency devaluation, political economic instability. And you got a lot of those right now, actually. It basically induces investors to take their financial assets abroad. You're going to go somewhere else. All right, with currency devaluation, you're like, wow, okay, it's high inflation. I'm going to go somewhere that doesn't have high inflation. If there's political or economic instability, right? Well, there's definitely economic instability right now. Fortunately, the United States is pretty much the leader in the global economy, so we don't have to worry about this just yet. But if there's economic instability in, say, another country that's a little bit smaller, they're like, yeah, you know what? Screw this. We're going somewhere else. Right? They're going to take their financial assets abroad. They think of it as you run a company and you just pack up the company and take everybody with you out of that country, or hell, sometimes even out of that state. If you look at the exodus out of New York and California after the COVID-19 outbreak, I'll kind of tell you some things. So when investors want to take their financial assets abroad, boom, you have capital flight, and that doesn't really help things. Now, sometimes this stuff's legal, sometimes it's not. But think of this too. If the U.S. is the only currency operating under modern monetary theory, and every other economy isn't doing that, well, you'd see a huge surge in capital flight out of the U.S. into other countries. Now let's assume for a second everybody uses modern monetary theory. Well, now there's like an incentive for one economy to deviate and not use MMT and have major capital inflows into their country. So I'll let you kind of think about that for a little bit. Think about how, like, if one country can devalue their currency and another country doesn't, think about what can happen with that. Think about what, like, financial flows would look like. If you want to read about it a little bit, feel free. I'm not sure if we'll be able to get into any sort of international finance by the end of this course. Hopefully we can. I'm not sure if we can. But yeah, if you're interested, take a look into that. See what happens with currency devaluation. And in the meantime, my apologies for posting this late, but I wanted to make at least a semi-decent video for you guys, and I'd rather high quality and it be a little late than low quality and on time, personally. But anyways, that is the end of this lecture. Thank you for sitting in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, doing whatever it was that you did. And enjoy the problem set that I just posted. I know it's kind of long, but the math is all relatively easy. If you're struggling with the math, you're either overthinking it or you need to email me, and I will help you out. So on that note, enjoy, and there's going to be a couple of lecture videos coming up very shortly on like looking at graphs. Can sort of explain the real business cycle model, and we can go from there. So until then, enjoy, and I will catch you later.